I was kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. So something good.
Something good came out of jail. So, we're right after this.
Okay. Hello. Oh, I'm. Okay, we're on there. Now let's get on here. Okay, we're going to be starting classes. Your 30-second warning. If you take longer to get to your seat, that does not mean that class will be shorter. It just means I will go the same amount, and we might not beat the Baptist to Dickies. Don't want that to happen. Wow, that got people quiet in a hurry. Do what?
I have a question.
Okay. I have lots of questions in class, so go ahead.
You said when darkness fell,
Yes.
that the Israelites had light in their lives?
Yes.
All I saw was that they had lights in their houses.
Well, were they?
I didn't understand it to mean all over.
We don't know for sure. It just seems as though they were unaffected. My translation said that where they lived. That they had light where they lived. And so it sounds like there's a discrepancy.
Yeah, I have the King James and it says in their dwelling.
In their dwelling?
Yeah.
So I just don't know enough about Hebrew to look. In fact, I didn't even know that a different translation said as such. But they certainly, there was...
Oh, for sure. If you got light in your house, I mean, that's all you need.
Yeah.
The Egyptians couldn't even this way.
Couldn't even see in front of them. And so we don't know if it was some kind of blindness that struck them or how it worked. But this would have been a really big one because there were a lot of gods or Egyptian gods who were assigned to the sun, and so that would have certainly caused a little bit of turmoil among them. This is going to be a class of questions, lots and lots of questions, and all I can tell you is I have more questions than I have answers. I really do. Yes, sir, John. And we don't know. We don't know how long all of these it took for all the plagues to take place, because even if you added up how long, some of them said how long they lasted, others of them didn't. There were spaces between those. We don't know for sure how long that the entire plagues would last. That was a question that I had. I looked it up and I couldn't find anybody. They said, well, we just don't really know. So it's unlike Genesis 1 where it says, and then there was evening and then there was morning the first day, and we get chronological order. We don't get that in Exodus. So we don't know how long that would have taken. So there's lots of questions. I can either start in my questions, we can start reading, or we've already kind of started a little bit of Q&A. Does anybody have any other questions before we just dive in? Yes, Brett?
Did Moses make it sound like they were just going to go for 3 days and come back? Or?
This is something that's always bothered me a little bit. For those of you who are online and you didn't hear, the question was just asked, did Moses say, hey, we just want to go 3 days and then we'll come back? That's something that had been done in the past. He had said, we just want to go a few days. I've always questioned why Moses took that tact. I wonder if that was something that God said, hey, just ask for a 3-day pass. But it sounds like that might be the case because Pharaoh then says, well, just leave your animals. On the ninth plague, he said, leave your animals. He says, no, we have to have those to sacrifice. And Pharaoh had enough of it. He didn't barter or negotiate. He could have said, okay, you can take, some of your animals, but leave most of them here. But at that point, Pharaoh had enough. The more I read through Exodus, the more I can't stand Pharaoh. the more he absolutely bothers me, that he would literally sacrifice his people for his own ego, because he thought he was so great that he thought he could handle this. And there were times his officials would say, we can't do this. Like, this comes from some power that we don't have. There were officials who questioned him. Even as they're getting ready to leave, there's this comment that the Egyptians, I think the word the NIV used was revered Moses. Like, they held him in high esteem. They might have thought more of Moses than they did of their own leader. And so there are times that we look at our leaders and we see the moral deficiencies that they have, or the arrogance, or the fact that they seem to be more concerned about themselves than they are about their people. That would have been the case for the Egyptians. Yes.
Does it say something about Pharaoh's power, because he had the power to stop after the first plague?
Yes.
He was so arrogant, he didn't.
He did.
What kind of power did he hold over the people, or whatever, that would cause him to still serve him? You had to know that he could have stopped them, and they had to know he could stop them.
Well, it would have taken a revolt or a coup of some kind. Julie just asked what kind of...
He had followed him.
Yeah.
Faithfully, we're saying, to the point of losing their firstborn.
Yes. What kind of uproar was there when people said, hey, this has got to stop? It goes all the way down to the end, and now we're jumping way on ahead. But I don't know if you remember this, but after the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea, the Egyptians are hot in pursuit, and God calls the water to come back in. But before that happens, God does something else, and it depends on the reading that you get, whether you're reading from the Hebrew or from some other sources. But they either said that the wheels fell off the chariots or the wheels got jammed up. Either way, they were having trouble moving. And at that point, at the very end, they say, their God is against us. We've got to get out of here. And you kind of hear this throughout. And so I've tended to build a little more sympathy for the Egyptians, because it seems like more and more they're being led down a path that they don't necessarily want to go. Is there an important moral for us from this? I think there is. I think for us it should serve as a reminder that ultimately we have to stand up for what we believe in. Now, how we balance that with following the laws of the land and giving honor to honor to our leaders, there is a balance between that. I just wonder how many of the Egyptians said, we're ready to jump ship. So this begs the really big question. And I have a lot of them, but this is one of the ones I think I want to save it for later. But I think it's the one that's kind of hovering, it's lingering. It's the elephant in the room about God destroying so many people. And what does that say about God? And so I want to talk about that, but let's kind of leave that for a little bit. And let's spend a little bit more time in the text. We're going to go a few things I think are interesting. We don't have really a whole lot of time to talk about, but I love in Exodus chapter 10, at the very end of the chapter, we have. I'm sorry, I said at the end of 10, I meant 11. Right at the end of 11, we read that Moses gets really mad, and it says he left. He was hot with anger, and he left Pharaoh. And to me, I love that, because it reminds us that Moses, while he from the beginning comes across as being one who seems apathetic, like find somebody else, he seems to care very deeply for the people, even when he doesn't even call them his own people. And to this point, he gets very angry. And I'm not really sure why he's angry, but I have a couple of ideas. I think one of them is because he's angry because Pharaoh is just so stinking stubborn. And I don't know, this is just a guess. I think Moses' heart goes out for the Egyptian people who are being ruled by this arrogant leader who would just as soon all his people suffer than to admit that he's not the great God that he believes that he is. And I think that really I think we misread. I don't want to get there yet. So 12:1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is to be the first month of your year. So already I just love this idea. God says we're resetting your calendar. Okay, why would God do this? Why would God reset why would he say this is now going to be the first month?
Well, it's a new beginning.
It's a new beginning. Okay? He wants them to remember and to commemorate and to celebrate what is about to take place. And this doesn't mean a whole lot, but I just love that the Exodus, the Passover resets their month, and the cross resets the year. We count away from the cross. We're 2021, which is such a weird, now I can't believe that we made it this far. But we are counting away. That counts back to when we had the birth of Jesus and celebrating that. So he says, I want you to start all over again, and then on the 10th day, I want you to take a year-old lamb. Okay? Any farmers in here? Any ranchers? Does anybody know anything about 1-year-old lambs? Von Ditto? Vaughn the shepherd? The what? They're cute. I grew up in a big city. I'm not a farmer like you guys back there. I don't know anything about big animals. They scare me unless they're on a plate with a little thing in it that says medium rare. That's about the only kind. But I lived in the city, and we had some friends who were in FFA. And the first time I heard them say FFA, I thought it was a joke. I thought they were being funny, Future Farmers of America. And then I learned that they're serious. They are very serious about their stuff. And they had a little lamb. And the little lamb, I remember it did two things. It would like hop. It would like hop. And I'm a terrible person. And I will stand before the Lord. But we would scare the little lamb. And he would go stiff and fall over. True, it happens. For those of you who don't have lambs or have had a lamb, it happens. You can scare them stiff. They will and they will just kind of fall over. I don't know. I don't understand physiologically what happens, but they fall over. And then in a minute they get up again, and we let them rest, get the blood flowing, and then we did it again just to make sure it wasn't a fluke. They're the cutest little things.
When they fall over?
No, oh yeah, they're funny when they fall over, but they're so cute. I mean, they're these little guys. And I'm a softie. Okay, I didn't grow up hunting. I didn't grow up on a farm where you had to deal with that. I have a few stories of where I've encountered animals that were dead, and I had to remove one off of my property. And just it's heartbreaking and it's sad. That was sad for me to see this poor little deer that was in our backyard that had got hit by a car and made it there. And picking up that little guy and putting him into the back of a truck was just heartbreaking. Can you think about taking this cute little 1-year-old lamb? I mean, he's just the perfect lamb. And slitting his throat.
What bothers me when it comes to what they did with animals like that, if a person had a sensitive part, if the priest had one and whatnot, how would that affect them emotionally?
I don't think any kind of hard. I think it would be hard. Louise says, what if you're a very emotional person? How would this affect you to see this? I think the whole purpose is that it would affect you emotionally. God wanted them to feel the pain and the sacrifice that was required in order for them to have freedom. I don't want to be gruesome, but I also don't want us to just forget what they did and what they would do for hundreds and thousands of years later, is that they would take this lamb and they would cut it open, they would slit its throat and they would bleed it out. And in this case, and they do it different ways. We talked a lot about this when we did our study on the feast several years ago, specifically when we got to the Passover, but they would bleed out that lamb. And they would collect some of the blood in a pail so that they could use the hyssop brush and paint it over. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But so we have on the 10th day, the animals you choose must be 1 year old. Okay, and they do that on the 10th day, right? Let me see, where did I read it? Here it is. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man must take a lamb or kid for his family, one for each household. Okay, so we read a few paragraphs. We said a few verses. The animals must be 1 year old and without defect. And then somebody read to me verse 6 of chapter 12.
Now you should keep it until the 14th day of the same month.
Okay. I know our kids haven't been in the school in a while, but we can't blame them for this one. Do the math. What just happened here? 4 days.
I mean, you have to keep it in the house 4 days?
Why? Why would God do that?
To get attached to it. Doesn't take long.
That you put into it.
Yeah. Now, cultures are a little different. In the New Testament, especially because where they were in cities that didn't have a whole lot of room, it really was common to keep the few animals that you had in your house. Not pet animals, animals that you would use to survive. And that could have been the case somewhat. But living in the land that they lived in, Goshen, was a really lush place. It was a perfect place that Joseph had picked out for his family 430 years prior. And for those of you, again, who you're used to having animals around, you probably see them a little differently. But the idea of taking this little 1 year old perfect lamb into your house without a blemish, and you are with him for the next 4 days. And when you pick this lamb, you already know what's going to happen. I think God, and this is a terrible phrase to use, but I think God wants them to have a little skin in the game. He wants them to know the sacrifice that must be made for redemption, for delivery, for freedom. He wants them to understand that it's got to come at a cost. And up to this point, they've had to do nothing. I mean, as far as we know, their understanding of God is very limited. It didn't take long for them to bail on the idea of leaving Egypt when things got a little tough. They said, Moses, go away. I hope God sees you and he judges you. We don't want to have anything to do with you, ... and your God. Right? We don't have this understanding of this deep relationship that the Israelites in captivity have towards God. All they know is that he has heard their cries and he's seen their suffering. They rejoice. But when things get worse, then all of a sudden they say, okay, I don't know about this anymore. And so God wants to develop a relationship, but God understands that it comes at a cost. That their deliverance isn't just, we're going to walk out of here. They need to know that there is a consequence that must be faced for sin and slavery. And for them, it was this 1 year old lamb. And then he goes on and he's even more specific, which, by the way, why did he say put blood on the doorpost? Why couldn't he just say, I want you to kill the lamb, and I know that you've killed the lamb? Why did he say, I want you to put it on your doorpost?
Show me your faith.
Show me your faith.
And show others.
And show others. See, I think there's a couple of things that go in here, and then an allusion for later on. But it is, one, to remind the Israelites. But two, I think it was to show the Egyptians. I think God had a heart for the Egyptians that we don't see just based on a tertiary reading of the text and say, well, he just killed them all off. He didn't really care about them. If that were the case, they would have all dropped dead day one. Day one. I think God has a heart for Egyptians who choose to worship different gods. And I think this was he was showing them as well. They're going to paint, they're going to take the hyssop, they're going to put it in the blood, and they're going to paint it, wipe it on the door frames. And the top of it is, in Hebrew, is called a lintel. And a lintel is actually a horizontal beam. And I think what a powerful illusion. What prophetic it is of this fact that it was the blood on this horizontal beam that would release the Israelites from slavery. And it was also blood on the horizontal beam of the cross that would release us from our sin as well. Throughout this, over and over again, we're going to get glimpses of what God is going to do in the New Testament through His Son. And He's going to say, you are in slavery, you are in bondage, and I am delivering you. And He's going to say, but it comes at a cost. Something has to be paid to redeem. It just has to work that way. So He's going to say a couple more things that He's going to request that they do. And again, I'll just put them in question forms. He says, that same night they are to eat meat. Okay, so let's stop here. They're basically being asked to do several things. One is they've got to pick out their best lamb. Okay, they've got to stay with it for 4 days. Then they have to kill it. But that wasn't the end. Then they have to take the blood and they have to paint it on the door frame. But then they have to do another thing. He says, and then I want you to eat the meat of the lamb that you just killed. So, why is this? Well,
He's fixing to send them on a long journey.
okay, He's fixing to send them on a long journey. He wants them to be well fed. Kind of like we talked several weeks ago in Acts, when Paul was on the ship and they hadn't eaten for weeks, and he says, okay, we're going to be saved. Sit down and eat. You're going to need your strength. Sure. What else? I don't know that there's necessarily a wrong answer. There may be multiple right answers. Why do you think he would have said, okay, I want you to sit down and eat?
Well, all this happens because the firstborn of the Egyptians is going to be put to death.
Okay.
All through during this Passover time.
Okay.
Because that's one of the reasons why you had them paint the blood over the doors and whatnot, because that way the angel of death would pass over.
Yeah.
And none of them.
But why would he say, I want you to sit down and have a meal? Why didn't he just say, kill the lamb, paint it on there? Why did he say, but I want you to roast the meat and I want you to basically figure out how much everybody needs to eat? And then he's going to go on, we didn't talk about this. I skipped one of those verses, but he says, but don't leave any left over. If there's any meat left over in the morning, I want you to burn it.
Well, that's to do with the Passover meal.
Okay. But why did he say you have to have a meal? Does anybody have a reason why they think a meal would have been important? Did he have a reason, or did he just say, you know what, don't waste the meat? Is there something going on here?
Could it have been a celebration?
Okay. We all have memories of growing up. And how many of our memories revolve around a table and chairs? I mean, okay, I'm not trying to brag, but I'm going to. My mom didn't cook very much, But there was one dish she could make that no one else could make like her. And it's the only time I would eat this dish, and it was the only time she would cook it. During Thanksgiving, she would make her squash casserole. I know, squash, it's a disgusting vegetable. It's weird shaped, but she could make a squash casserole that was just amazing. And I can remember sitting down. I remember sitting down at my grand's house, and my granddad would say the prayer. I remember every word to his prayer to this day. I mean, I just, there's something about this. God understood the importance of remembering. And He is going to use all their senses as they remember the Passover. Seeing the little 1-year-old lamb frolic around the house and cuddle up next to him on those 4 nights before it was going to be slaughtered. Don't you think they would remember that? The sounds that little lamb would make when it was being sacrificed. The smell of the food, the taste. God wanted to incorporate all their senses to picking up that hyssop plant and putting it in the blood and wiping that blood across and feeling the texture of that brush go across that rough wood. It would have been something that they would have remembered so vividly. God was saying, don't forget. Don't forget. Every year, I want you to celebrate this. Julie?
While they were celebrating, just maybe it was to remind them of what God was doing for them at the time. Because at the time they were celebrating and eating this little innocent lamb, eating a good meal, the angel of death was going through Egypt and wiping the firstborn.
Yeah.
It wasn't quiet in Egypt.
Yeah. That's can you imagine the anxiety that they would have felt? I mean, I can't remember the name of the test. We used to talk about it, and I wish I could remember his 2 names. Somebody in here who's familiar with psychology will. But there's a test that you can take that has about 20 different life-altering changes that take place in your life. I showed it in a class several years ago, and each one of them is allotted so many points. And basically, the purpose of the test is to find out your stress level, and that certain different things can cause a different amount of stress. Even good things can cause stress. You know, a child getting married or a child going off to college, that can induce stress. Getting a new job, even a promotion, can be stress. But then you have a divorce, or you have a death in the family, or you have a move, or you have a change in your occupation, and you start adding up all those points, and you get over 100 according to this test, and that, like, you could have an emotional breakdown. Like, you start counting up what's going on among the Israelites, and you have to believe that this is a peak stress time. I mean, they have been enslaved. This guy shows up, says that there's a God who's listening to them. Things get worse. They are beaten brutally. They're being asked to do things at work that they weren't asked to do before, i.e. gather the straw. Like, it has become a very emotional time. Okay, they're bringing in and they're making a sacrifice of this little lamb that they have. Okay, and they're being told, get ready, you're about to leave. Like, the stress level has to be crazy high. And then you think about across the road, you have the Egyptians who are just in turmoil. Every time I read that sentence, the wells of Egypt were worse than they had ever been or would ever be. It literally, I get goosebumps on the back of my neck thinking about every house. It said that every household had a death. I mean, statistically, what are we talking about? I mean, the numbers have to be crazy, including, it says livestock, but the Hebrew word is animal. Even the animals. Can you imagine the mass hysteria? And so I have another question about that. But the one thing, it's right now, what they're doing this Passover is in preparation. But in some ways, it's also a celebration of what God's going to do. And I find that pretty interesting that he says, I want you to sit down and I want you to commemorate and celebrate what God is going to do for you. And again, some of them were probably like, yeah, life is really bad, but I think I just would like to stay here. Because if you didn't grow up, if you weren't born in Hobbs, there was a time in your life where you thought, do I really want to go live in the desert? Is this where I really want to be? And there are people who... How do you go from Hawaii to Hobbs? That's what I want to know. Tim, I love you. You're a great guy. I think there's something missing that says, I want to go to Hobbs. I mean, we both have sand. It's just that you have a little more water than we do. And trees. And so they're being reminded of what God is going to do as they begin their exodus, and not only their exodus but also their entrance. And I want to read one more thing. This we're in 12 still. 12:12 says, on that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the what? On all the gods of Egypt. And this is where we'll spend just a few minutes. I want to talk about this. I want us to wrap and I'm not trying to just make it easy, okay? I'm not. There are some texts in the Bible that I don't understand. And I've come to understand that I'm not going to understand it. But this is one, I'm not trying to ease it over on you, but I really think I don't think in this case God is mean and hateful. Now, anybody can read this and on the outset say, that is a mean and hateful God. Because a mean and hateful God would just destroy a people in the way that he did. I mean, I just nearly bet most people wish that they had died that night than to have lived on. Can you imagine the pain and heartache of that? I mean, it would be something that they would never forget.
That's a jealous God. And I was just reading here, we always talk about the angel of death passing through. It wasn't an angel. That was God himself that killed the firstborn.
So,
I think that's important.
You called him a jealous God,
Yes.
right? Which we have in the text. God calls himself a jealous God. So, jealous, is that... What kind of connotation does that have? Negative. Yeah, I mean, why are you so jealous? And I've shared this before, but I love my wife. You all know this. I want you to know I'm a very jealous husband. I really am. And you can judge me if you want to, but I'm jealous for the love that I have for my wife. Now, the level in which my jealousy kicks in is maybe different than some other jealousy that I think probably could be unhealthy. You know what? If I go to a restaurant and Brett happens to be working at the restaurant, I've just made you a waiter, and we go to sit down at the table, and Brett is the waiter. He pulls out the chair, and my wife sits down. Perfectly okay with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. Okay, and if Rusty happens to work at that same restaurant and he's the host, I didn't say hostess, he's the host, and when we walk up to the door, he opens up the door for my wife. I'm okay with that. I appreciate that you two would bring honor to my wife. But I want you to know, Bill Jarrett, that is my wife. and that you can open up the door or pull out the chair, but you cannot kiss my wife. That's my job. I guard that jealously. And I should. I should guard that. I should say she is mine. And while I appreciate when people do things for her, ultimately she is mine and I am hers. And we belong to one another. And because of that, I have that jealousy. And you can sit back and you say, you know what? I think that makes sense. I think it's fair that you draw a line. I think it's fair for God to draw a line that says, these are my people. You shall have no other gods before me. I am jealous to be in relationship with you. I don't want you praying to or singing to or bowing down to any other god that you have made up that you think is more important. I made you. I knit you together in your mother's womb. I know the hairs on your head. You create these gods and you sing to them and you have these temples and you do all these terrible things. That's a part of what the Egyptians were doing. And God says it's not right. And I am jealous for you. And I'm tired of the God of the Nile and the God of the sun and the God of the gnat. I want to be your God. And the Egyptians had chosen to ignore a God who had displayed his power to them. And God said, I am your God. Listen, you worship the God of the Nile, your life will be miserable. Because that God will never satisfy you, will never fulfill you. You'll worship to a God who cannot see you and who cannot hear you. And that is not why I created you. God created, I'm sorry, I'm getting excited. God created Egyptians. And He wants to be in relationship with them. He chose the Israelites so that they would be a beacon to the world that would say the gods that you serve aren't really gods at all.
Doesn't that show the difference when the Egyptians had many gods with little g?
Yeah.
All you need is one God with the big G.
Yeah.
The Israelites had one God, not the God of this, the God of this, the God of this, that were, they made their images.
Yes.
They made their images.
Yeah, they created this genogram, like a family tree of all the gods that are like intermingling and intermarrying with the other gods, and they would have other gods, and it was a really complex system. And God was like, why do you have to do this?
They had to see and they had to feel their gods.
Yeah.
Where the Israelites had them here.
Yes. And so God ultimately is going to display his power through the plagues. And even though it brought such pain, it was an opportunity not just for the Israelites, but also for the Egyptians to realize there is a God and one God. And He is the God of all things. And we see that a lot through the New Testament too. Lynn?
I wonder if there's any significance why. I know He's teaching Israelites during this time also. He wants them taking notice. I wonder if there's any significance in just a lamb. In that day, a lamb could be a sheep or a goat.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there's any
Why He would...
God has all these details, and then here's something that is the object of sacrifice, and it's kind of left open. And I don't know. I'm just wondering if there's some reference there that maybe I haven't ever read about. But because a lamb is a description of a sheep or a goat around a year old. That's when the meat is more precious.
Yeah.
In either one of those animals. So we're like in goat and mullet, the way I understand it, is like when they're older and the meat isn't as good.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's anything or something I dreamed up, but I just couldn't help but wonder if maybe, is there any reference to that being the Egyptians versus the Israelites, and both are included in it, or Maybe
You
I
know,
just read too much.
well, a couple things. One, we read early back in Genesis when Joseph is making that, and it's just kind of a byline, like it's almost like you don't even think about it. Joseph is trying to convince or suggesting to his Pharaoh at the time, like, hey, why don't you give the Israelites Goshen? It's a good land for raising sheep, and then, by the way, sheep were detestable to the Egyptian people, to the Egyptians. And so maybe that was part of it. I think the fact that there's this little blemishless white lamb that's being slaughtered. I think the fact that we associate a lamb with meekness, and that's how ultimately it's going to be. Jesus is described as the lamb, this perfect little lamb that's being slaughtered. But I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. Why didn't he choose a different animal?
The Israelites didn't see the Egyptians as the goats. The Egyptians never liked the sheep.
Yes.
I just read too much.
Yes.
Curious.
Did somebody have a comment over here? Okay. I wasn't sure. I heard somebody, and I want to make sure we didn't miss out on anything. So we have, they're about to head out. But I think one of the things that's, okay, I wanted to talk about a couple more things. He says, okay, I want you to eat the lamb. I think there is significance to tying it in so that they would remember. But then he's going to give them I know this sounds silly, but he kind of gives them sides that they're supposed to eat with the lamb. What are they? Bitter herbs and unleavened bread. Can we talk about this for just a second? Why would God be so specific? Why would he say you need to eat it with bitter herbs?
It's a reminder of the bitterness of the slavery they were in. That's a note in my Bible, that's not.
Yes. Anybody familiar with the GODS? You remember. GODS? The good old days syndrome? Like you've had it, like we all do. Like life was really good before the pandemic. Remember when we got to do all those things that we wanted to do? Remember when we got to go out to restaurants and eat? What day did we shut down, Jennifer? Do you remember? March 13th, 3/13. Did anybody wake up on March 12th and say, this is the best life is ever going to get? Did anybody say life is really good? I love life going on right now. I love the fact that I am busier than I've ever been in my whole life. I love the fact that I'm exhausted and I'm worn out and my kids are going a million different places and I have a million different things to do. And I said this. I even preached about this. And God has thumped me on the ear a little bit. But I remember saying, you know what? If we could just slow down, things would be a lot better. We just need to slow down. If we had a little more time. If we didn't have so many places to go and so many things to do, things would be so much better. And then we have a year of nothing. And all of a sudden everybody's like, man, I wish my schedule was busy again. I wish I could do something. I wish I could go eat. And we had, sports and all these things just running on top of each other and doing all these things that are fun and great and awesome, but they kind of got out of control. And now all of a sudden we're looking at the good old days.
Actually, for a lot of families, though, it was a good time because it gave them to have time together. Because for a lot of people, they didn't have the time to be together during the pandemic.
If you were, don't misunderstand me, I'm not trying to be judgmental. If you are a good family, the pandemic gave you an opportunity to be even a better family, to even reset and get back to some of those things. If you weren't a good family, we had kids who are getting beaten daily. Before it was they got beat on the weekends because they were at school. And so, my heart goes out for people who choose to allow the alone time. It could be, it's a double-edged sword. For people, they could say, you know what? It's an opportunity for our family to come together and grow. For others, it was, I can't being around that brat kid. I can't wait till he's gone. In the meantime, there's extra beatings coming his way. And so, yes.
And cons.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, depending what's
Sure.
what's going on with
And-
that particular pandemic.
And so for the Israelites, they have the same issue. They very, very, very quickly go back to good old days syndrome. You remember this? They have been delivered out. They have been given a plunder. God caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites. So when the Israelites says, hey, can I have your gold and silver? They said, yes, sure, take it with you. So they go off and they take it with them. Right? And so, they're loaded down. They're now leaving slavery. They're going to get to go to the land that's been promised to them by their forefathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. God has promised to be with them. They have Moses and the staff. The plagues have been seen. This is getting awesome. They get out there. They turn around. Pharaoh's coming at them. And what did they say?
Why didn't you just leave us?
Why did you bring us out here to die? Was there not enough graves in Egypt to bury us? How quickly they forgot. They immediately forgot how God was in the process of delivering them. And they're already like, it was better when we were in Egypt, slaves, building whatever the Egyptians wanted us to build. And people were dying daily from being beaten and being worked to death. And so one of the reasons why the bitter herbs were selected by God is because God wanted to say, hey, this is a reminder of how terrible things were before you came in relationship with me. When you had all the other gods, when you didn't understand who I was and my love for you, then yes, it was terrible. And then there's the thing about the unleavened bread. Okay, and then he says, and when you eat it, gird your loins. For those of you who read the King James Version, what does that mean?
Get ready to move.
Tuck your cloak into your belt. Okay, so if you imagine you have this long, and it could easily get caught up, especially, we forget that they would have been traveling on rough terrain. They wouldn't have had sidewalks to go down. And so it could have got hung up. He's saying, get ready to go and eat with your sandals on. He wanted them to know. And I think this applies to that. I think this is really neat because years and years later, as they're remembering this, even ones who didn't participate in it, he would say, you're going to have these bitter herbs. This is life like, this is what life is like before God. Right? These bitter herbs. And then he says, you're with a God who travels. Get ready to move. Even when they were in the land God had promised them, they would eat the Passover with the sandals on and their cloak tucked into their belt to say, I am a God who moves. You need to be willing to go with me wherever that's going to be.
Isn't that what he tells us today?
Oh, that's what he tells us today.
Keep your loins girded, keep your sandals on, be ready.
Be ready.
Be ready at all times.
Gird your loins. I know that's probably something you haven't heard in a little while, but that's God's call for us today. I see there are some teens out there who their loins have been girded because they're walking around, which means that unfortunately I am out of time and I didn't get to talk about all the things that I wanted to talk about. So guess what? We will have next week. But between now and then, we are meeting on Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock. We start off in here. I really hope y'all come because we have our little kids participate in the worship. And last week it lasted, I think, 7 minutes or 9 minutes, something like that. And then we have the kids go off to class and we have a class and we're studying a book called 12 Ordinary Men by John MacArthur. It's about the 12 apostles. I want to encourage you to come and join us for that because we have lots of participation in that as well. We're going to close out in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father God, again, I just thank you for being an awesome God. Lord, I pray that we think about the time before we knew you as a bitter time. Lord, and even though we still find ourselves wandering in the desert at some times, Lord, I just pray that we realize that you're a God who's always with us. And so, Lord, please help us to gird our loins, to be ready to move, and to remember that you're a God who moves with us. Lord, may we continue to follow you each and every day. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you for being here. You're dismissed. Yes, sir.
Did you get a chance to look at that video?
I have not yet.
There's some that live there so close.
Really? Okay.